The Sikh Human Rights Group proudly presents our Environmental and Diversity Speaker Series. Today's topic, addressing climate change through the lens of environmental geography. Today you'll be listening to Dr Olalekan Adekola from York St John University. Dr Adekola is a geographer with an interest in using interdisciplinary approaches for understanding how the costs and benefits from climate change are distributed across different socio-economic groups. For example, he has worked extensively on research projects aimed at improving understanding and communication among stakeholders on climate-related topics, including, but by no means limited to, the adaptation of urban infrastructures to enhance climate resilience, co-designing sustainable aquaculture practices, and stakeholder engagement projects to reduce flood risks and to enhance the management of ecosystem services. Recorded live on the 25th of November 2021, this is the 12th podcast in Sikh Human Rights Groups 2021 Environmental and Diversity Speaker Series. Welcome, Dr. Adekola, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to join you today.
Wonderful. It's an honor to have you on. Thank you very much. Doctor, can I please ask you to begin by telling our audience a little bit about the invaluable environmental protection work that you and your colleagues have done in the past and are currently undertaking?
Oh, thank you very much. I've worked in with a number of teams, and I've been involved in a bit of research over the years. A fundamental aspect of the work that I do, or the sort of research we do, is around understanding and bringing different voices together to the table when it comes to environmental issues or environmental challenges. So basically, I'm interested, or I do research on different environmental issues, like you said, climate change, flooding, wetland degradation. I've done things on aquaculture, on building, sustainable building. But what ties all my research together is around the need to bring different voices to the table. Earlier on in my career, I early understand that for us to solve most of the environmental challenges that we face as a society, as a world, one of the key things is we need everyone's knowledge, we need everyone's perspective and every view to be at the table. One of the research I've done is around wetland degradation in the Niger Delta. And one of the things we were doing is to sort of understand the different institutions and how different groups use the wetland. So when I say institution, I'm talking about the practices. How do they get access to the wetland? How do they are able to get to the wetland to get their fish? How can they go there to farm? And at the end of the day, it's about understanding the dynamics and how that relates also with a formal policy, the law by the government to say, oh, you cannot go into the wetland. It's around bringing all those groups and the different stakeholders involved in the use of the wetland together to sort of see how best can we use these resources with everybody sort of coming to the table and agreeing on a sustainable way. So the sustainability is about thinking of the environment, but also thinking about the livelihoods of the local community. Like you said, I've also done projects around adaptation of infrastructure. So at the moment, we're talking about climate change. We just finished COP26. It's about adapting. So we see some of the impact already. So some of the research I've done is around bringing together policymakers on how best they can design infrastructure and institutions so that the people can better adapt to some of the impact that they are already seeing in the environment at the moment. All the projects, so I've done a project at the moment in the city of York in the UK. We are working on flooding. So we're looking at, York used to flood a lot, used to be a lot of flooding. There was one around 2015. So one of the projects we did is around bringing together all the groups from the government, the non-governmental organizations, these community groups, the environment agency, cyclists, and just bringing all these groups together that have an interest around the impact or the implication of flooding and the sort of infrastructure that will be designed. And how can we bring all these people together to get a solution that involves the voice and involves the perspective and the interest of everyone?
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was extremely insightful and very thorough. Dr. Jasdev Rai, could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and tell Olalekan a little bit about Sikh Human Rights Groups' environmental policies?
Yeah, I'm the director of Sikh Human Rights Group. My day job is actually an ENT surgeon, but the Sikh Human Rights Group has been going on for a long time. Environment and climate issues are one of our core subjects that we take on. Our approach has been less technical, more to try and get society and communities interested. And one of the things we felt was that the climate issue it doesn't seem to be taken on board by communities around the world. And their governments are active, but I've been to countries in Africa, countries in India and Southeast Asia, but the communities are more or less not disengaged with this issue. And we did an analysis, and we even wrote a report for UNESCO. Our feeling was that most of the UN language and the declarations on climate are very much based on one civilization. They don't seem to incorporate the relationship of the human being to the environment from other civilizations. And it's not surprising, therefore, they feel disengaged from the whole debate, even if they want to do something. And they have the feeling that it's somebody else's problem. So we are pushing for a plural approach to the climate issue. We think it's too important to be playing hegemonic games, whether one civilization is superior to another civilization. I think we are on the brink of a disaster or extinction, as some might say, and it's time to bring in the whole world on board on it, so that people take ownership of this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. We're going to begin today's discussion by delving into a variety of prominent environmental questions. I'm then going to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Bethan Walters, who will ask you a few questions on diversity and inclusion related matters. Dr. Adekola, in your expert opinion, what are the greatest challenges that our global community faces when it comes to combating and redressing the negative impacts of climate change, and how can these identified challenges be overcome?
Okay, thank you very much. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face at the moment, again, we all see some of the real impact of climate change around us. So if you look in the news, you will hear of temperatures rising. We'll see a lot of drought, wildfire. We are starting to see more frequent rainfall and flooding, patterns shifting around glaciers. So there's a lot we are seeing around the impact of climate change, and we all must do all that we can to actually prevent all the emissions and all the activities that are linked to these sort of changes that we are seeing, because they are all somewhat linked to climate change. So if we are to solve them, we need to change our lifestyle, basically. So that's one of the key things that will be required. So we need to change lifestyles, we need to change the economy and the way the economy function. And I'm glad it was also pointed out by Dr. earlier. We need to also think about the sort of voices and the knowledge that we rely on and the power dynamics that come to play when we are trying to solve some of these issues. So we need to take a lot of steps. Individuals need to take steps and take actions. We need to reduce our waste. We need to think of the way we go on holidays and the sort of things we do. But more importantly is the need for us to think of how government comes in and the role that everyone within society will have to play in this.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rai, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think that's been put really well, and I think the states and I think the international campaigns need to be less confrontationist against each other, but to be inclusive of people, their voices. And let's not forget, a lot of cultures had festival rituals and practices which celebrated the environment and nature. And this all seemed to have been more or less either marginalized or forgotten. I think that sort of spiritual connections they had through culturally need to be revived so that the technical sphere and the architecture can work in combination with that, in cooperation with all. Yeah,
I think that's essential. That's important. I didn't mention earlier. So again, some of the work I do is around my research is around what we call cultural ecosystem services. And with cultural ecosystem services, these are ways local indigenous communities, actually, because of the cultural affiliation they have to nature, they protect the environment. So I worked in the Niger Delta of Nigeria. And one of the things within the wetland that even everything we hear about the Niger Delta is about crude oil and pollution, right? But if you go there, there are sacred groves that are being protected for hundreds of years. And that's where you can find good biodiversity, very biodiverse. Whereas other parts have been degraded, those sacred groves are being protected with local knowledge, with local culture. One of the things, again, I learned while in that community is they don't kill the crocodile because they regard the crocodile as the grandfather. So they value nature, they value those things that probably we don't value in other systems. And it's not only in that culture. I've seen experiences in other societies where they have this rich knowledge, rich understanding of nature, and without engaging with those communities to understand their own perspective, and a lot that the global community, those sitting around the table, can actually learn from those indigenous knowledge. We are losing a lot, and that's what I believe. I think those knowledge are so unique, they are so important, and they are so useful if we are going to solve these challenges. And you said, if we are going to solve the challenges, what do we need to do? It's about bringing those voices as well to the table and not making it a preserve of scientific or technocratic knowledge only. But we need to appreciate those voices sometimes relegated to the background. There's a lot to learn from that. And that's part of the solution, really, because those indigenous, local, what we call informal traditional institutions can help us to solve these problems at the local level, which maybe COP26 cannot solve, because the president of the US cannot go to a local community in India or in Bangladesh, but the institutions working within those local communities can have a lot of strong impact to solve some of these issues, really.
Thank you very much to both of you. That was extremely interesting. I mean, you've pretty much, Dr. Adekola, you've pretty much covered the next question I had for you, but it was going to be, what lessons have you taken away from your research that can inform us about the most effective methods to mitigate and adapt to the negative impacts of climate change, both in terms of the physical effects and the governance gaps, as you mentioned, that are currently persisting around the globe? So I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add to the discussion.
I'll say along the line of my thought, really, that engagement with various stakeholders, various voices is important, especially the indigenous knowledge. Scientific knowledge is important, but we need to understand the place of the non-scientific knowledge, the place of the custodians of this knowledge in finding a solution to some of the environmental challenges. And when I talk of bringing different groups, different stakeholders, I'm not only talking about the local community. Even if we get to the local community, we also need to look at the different demographic groups. We need to look at age group, the different gender, really, male, female, young, old. We need to look at all those if we really, because there's a lot of knowledge held within that. And if we're really to And that's a key knowledge, a key takeaway from my research, really. Maybe I can share this experience. One of the first project I was involved in is somewhere in Africa where we distributed high yield seeds that were brought in and imported, and we gave to the local community. But because we didn't engage with them to understand their perspective, they didn't use it. It wasn't useful to them because it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any meaning to them. And I learned quickly that if we really want to solve this problem, we need to listen to different voices, really. We need to acknowledge the strength, the knowledge, and that the scientific knowledge is not the only knowledge available. There is other knowledge that is essential and useful to solving environmental issues.
Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Jasdev, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add or any lessons that you've taken away that you'd like to share.
I think it's been covered really quite well. As I said, the two questions sort of more or less merged. Yeah. So.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. My next question for you both is, in your expert opinions, do you consider COP26 have been a success, a failure, or somewhere in the middle? For those of you who don't know, COP26 was the 26th United Nations Conference on Climate Change. It took place in Glasgow from the 1st of November 2021 to the 12th of November 2021 and brought together 197 countries and world leaders to present their updated plans to reduce carbon emissions worldwide. Now, obviously, we've touched upon this before, Dr. Adekola, but if I could ask you to go first, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, COP26 is an interesting one. Yes, it did move. It moved us forward. It moved us away from where we are. So I'm happy that we were able to get the Glasgow Climate Pact signed and agreed by all the countries. So that's a positive. We moved away from heading towards, according to scientists, modeling 2.8 degrees Celsius above heating of the globe, above pre-industrial time. We are now sort of, with the commitment made, we are heading again to back towards the 1.5 is back on the table. So I think that's positive. That's something worth us being happy about, because we are able to avert some of the climate catastrophe that would have faced if we didn't go that line. So that was very good, and I think it's something worth celebrating. It's also good, I mean, this has been in the media lately, that we mentioned coal within the climate agreement, even though coal had been one of the biggest source of fossil fuel and carbon emission. It's never been included in the sort of negotiation over the years. We can argue why that is. Maybe that is also part of the sort of global power imbalance that existed over the years. But the good thing is that that came into the agreement. I think also that's a positive. It's something I'm sort of glad and happy that did happen. There is also other positive that we can see. China and India, two big countries that are responsible for global climate emission, agreeing to work together. That's never happened in the past. Actually, they've always been at opposite ends. I thought that also a sort of positive. We heard of some countries, 100 countries coming together to reduce desertification or deforestation. All these are positive. So that's why I said it's taking us a step forward. So if this commitments, if they are kept to, I think we've achieved something good, right? However, on the other hand, is the difficulty really in reaching this agreement, and the way countries are not really showing a lot of commitment, like what will be expected of them. You know, with the word around changing language and people quarreling about verbs that are being used within agreement, and that took almost days to agree. Is it going to be phasing out of coal or phasing down of coal? So that became a big challenge within the whole thing. And I think for me, with COP26, is one of the biggest achievements is the fact that all these countries will come back again next year in Egypt. And we can see, have they really done what they said? Because what we have at the moment is just something signed on paper. We've signed Paris Agreement. After 5 years, nothing much was done. But next year in Egypt, everyone is coming back again. So we are not going to wait 5 years before we hear from these countries again. So the fact that there is a sort of policing, so to say, or a way to follow up on what countries are doing, if they are keeping to what they have committed to, I think that's a positive. What I just felt wasn't good is the way big countries sort of dominated the scene. I'm not sure if everybody saw that. For me, you didn't hear much from the small island nations in the Caribbean, the Maldives, the Belize, these countries that are almost being taken over by flooding, by sea level rise. They couldn't change the agreement. India and China could change the world, but Belize, because it's a small country. So again, I'm not too happy with the sort of power imbalance that still exists within the global climate negotiation. Yes, we've gone forward, we've made some achievements, but back to the point that everyone's voice should count. I still think with COP26, some voices seems more important, more powerful than some other voices. I would have loved a situation where those smaller countries that are facing some of the biggest impact, those communities that are already experiencing landslide, have lost their livelihoods, that have lost their farmlands. If we could hear more from them, if they could have more power and they could have more opportunity to change things the same way India and China could change the text at the last minute. So again, I'll say I'm an optimist. I think yeah, hopefully if it is implemented, and that's my expectation, that countries will go back and implement what they've committed to. Yeah, it's a positive. It takes us that we are not heading towards 2.8 and we are heading closer to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think that's a positive, but we need to do something about the sort of power imbalance when it comes to these negotiations around Conference of Parties.
Thank you very much. And once again, I completely agree with you. Dr. Wright, could I ask you, do you consider COP26 to have been a success, a failure, or somewhere in the middle?
Well, if you were to ask many of the climate activists, then it's been a failure. Their expectations were not met. But I tend to agree with Dr. Adekola that I think this is a bit of a threshold at the COP26, because for the first time, we haven't heard, I would say there may be some, any dissenting voices saying this is all rubbish. Whereas even until a couple of years ago, even the BBC, in its obsession with balancing, always wheeled out somebody who would say this is all rubbish, it's just scientists making things up. But there was nothing of that sort, and there is a seriousness which has dawned on the world, and those voices have now more or less been completely dumbed down. I think it was too much to expect to think that very big countries can suddenly switch off the developments they are engaged in. Particularly countries like China and India, who are trying to catch up with their huge populations. And so the fact that they have committed to something is a good sign. And I think as the voices get louder around the world, the commitments will become more and more serious and more urgent. I also feel that one of the things that might emerge from this is a lot of people will start looking at the plight of the small islands and might start supporting them and ask their governments to take them seriously. So, yeah, I think it's on the right road.
Yeah.
let's hope within a couple of years it gets there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Doctor. I think getting those two countries, China, India, who represent more than half of the world population, I think that's a big win. Yeah, and I think with time, as it goes on, as those countries sort of commit more, yes, they need to develop. That's all the essence of sustainable development. We need to recognize that those countries, without this technology and without support as well, without the sort of 100 billion that is promised to help these countries in the developing world, they probably wouldn't be able to achieve more. So yeah, getting all the countries on board, and I think over 100 presidents came to Glasgow. So that again, it's a positive. The commitment, the interest it garnered around the world. I don't think any of the previous conference of parties has ever done this before. You get the oil companies, everyone coming, everyone wanted to be in Glasgow, wanted to be at the center. Where I hope it's not for PR stunt, but even if that is what they've come for, at least they've heard some of the stories, they've heard some of the plight of people, and they can go back with that. I think that was good. I was lucky to be in Glasgow, and I was at the Global Day of the Walk, where almost 250,000 people from different parts of the world, different cities coming together for a unique cause. I think that was good. It's definitely raised global awareness, and that's a positive.
Thank you very much. Now, speaking more generally, my next question for you is, what should ordinary or non-expert members of our global society do when they think newly enacted environmental policies or laws are unethical, unjust, or quite simply not progressive enough? And Dr. Adekola, if I could ask you to go first, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, putting me on the hot seat there. My idea of democracy, and I'm starting with that because that underpins this, what I would say people within society should do, is that politics and democracy is about engagement of the people, is the voice of the, so actually the word police or the agora, the origin of what we call politics is around people being able to disagree, not violently, but at least it's about disagreement and dissension. We don't get that a lot in the politics and the democracy of today. And I guess that's where the challenge is, where government will come with laws or legislations that are anti-people, that are unjust, that are not inclusive, that are sort of not ethically sound. But if we have through democracy, if we have through practice of politics, probably we will not get there to that level where people will take to what I call the democratic insurgent groups, such as we have groups like Extinction Rebellion or the Insulate groups that come up. The point I'm trying to make is, for what I will not say we do if we see unjust legislation is not to keep quiet. I'm not an advocate of keeping quiet in the face of wrong. At the same time, I will not say people should go to the extreme of being violent, but I would say make your voice known, express those views. The worst thing we can do in the face of tyranny, they say, is to keep quiet. And if we see people that I adore, people like Mahatma Gandhi, or we talk of the Nelson Mandelas, the Martin Luther Kings, they weren't violent, but they made their voice known, and they stood against oppression. They stood against things that were unjust within their own society. My suggestion, or my sort of advice to non-expert, is to say, use your voice. You've got a voice. You've got some knowledge. You have ideas that can be brought to play. Make that voice, make it known to those that might have designed those institutions or those laws. I'm not sure if I answer that very well anyway, but yeah, I think the point is, don't just take it. Democracy or politics expects you to speak up. Not speaking up or not taking an action, making your voice known, will probably be worse than the unjust policy itself.
Thank you very much. That's some really great advice. Dr. Wright, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I think I would agree that we need to try and get many more diverse voices engaged in the whole process. It needs to be owned by people generally. When people see an issue as part of their culture, they're more driven to ensure that governments deliver on that. Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you very much. My final question for you today is, if you could pick one thing, is there one small thing that we could all adopt into our daily routines that would significantly help to mitigate and adapt the negative impacts of climate change? Dr. Adekola, if I could ask you to go first, that'd be wonderful.
Yes, definitely. We all have a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do. One simple thing that I've encouraged and I do and I tell people to do is to walk more. It's good for your health. Cycle more so we can reduce the usage of cars. So that's one way we can, as individual, do our little bit. They say every little helps. So the little I do, the little you do contribute. So we can eat more vegetables. We can do away with meat. We can think more about the way we go on holidays. Maybe rather than going far places, we might want to stay a bit more local. We take shorter showers, so maybe not running the tap so much or using buckets to have our shower again. These are individual choices anyway. And we can also encourage buying of environmentally friendly materials. I think that could also go a long way. But more importantly, that I say is to switch off the light when you're not using it. So don't just plug your phone charging for hours and hours. It takes a lot of electricity, which means we burn more fossil fuel. So just switching off the light when you don't need to, it's important. If there are holes underneath the door, that means more air comes in, and then you need to put on the heater. Block those sort of passages. Those are little things that we can do. There's a lot of little things that we can do. We can reduce, recycle, reuse. We all do all those already probably. But those are small steps that each of us can contribute to the solving the problem of climate change.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I agree with you. I think very achievable for us all. Dr. Wright, can I please ask you if there was one small thing that we could all adopt into our daily routines? Is there something in your opinion that goes beyond what Dr. Adekola has covered, or do you line yourself with him?
No, I agree with him, and I think on a personal level, I'm increasingly looking at anything I buy from shops, etc., whether the packaging is recyclable or not, and avoiding anything that is not recyclable, and give an extra penny or so. That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think that's an important one, because we go into the store and we see a plastic packaging, paper packaging, and we might assume all paper can be recycled. Actually, there are quite a lot of paper packaging that cannot be recycled. So I agree with you, Doctor. It's good to look at those packaging to see if it is one of those that can really be recycled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you both. I'm now going to give the floor to my colleague, who will ask you a few questions on diversity and inclusion related matters. Bethan, you have the floor.
Thank you both. That was really insightful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. We've already kind of touched on this, so so it will just be expanding, I guess, on what you spoke about, especially with COP. But the first question is, can you explain to us in your own words how human rights and the environmental issues are mutually inclusive? So, for instance, looking at maybe countries who are most affected, countries who have been left to develop further without the same access and resources as the kind of post-colonial kind of countries.
Yeah, I think it goes together, and probably part of the challenge we face with some of these global issues like climate change is the lack of equality and trying to separate the human rights, so to say, and the environmental issue, but they are interlinked. The truth of the matter is the countries that are suffering the most have contributed the least to this problem. They've not contributed more. I'm talking of that science, that's proven that these countries having the biggest impact have contributed just very little. So it's not right, it's not socially just, it's not morally right that then they bear all the brunt and they are not being sort of supported. So these environmental issues, we cannot divorce them or remove them from human rights issues. At the national level, in terms of countries involved, that needs to come on the table when we are discussing and negotiating. How can we help? How can the richer nations, the United States, the UK, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, all these countries that develop, Canada, Australia, how can they help those other countries, including India, Bangladesh, China, countries in Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, and all those countries that are still struggling, in the Maldives, Belize, the island nations, how can they be supported? And that is essential to and that's it really, in my own words, at the national level. But more importantly, also at the subnational level, is we need to also be careful that within nations, we do not miss out the link between environmental issues and human rights. And this played a lot maybe in the US, where you see anywhere you find ethnic communities like the African Americans, that's where you find the landfills, and there are research that's proven that. So there's a link really that some environmental issues affect some groups more than it affects the other group. It's something we just need to acknowledge, both at the international level and also at the national, subnational level. What I think is key and is essential in all of this is that all these countries should have right to participate. So every group should have a right to participate in decision making. They should be able, they should not just be consulted. It should not just be, oh, what do you want? What should we do for you? It should be active participation. There is a paper called Einstein Ladder of Participation. They should be at the top of that ladder. They should be part of the decision-making process. It's not about consultation here, and that's part of their human right. Part of the human right is good engagement, and they should have access to justice. There should be access to justice where communities have been, their resources really have been degraded. And I'm talking of communities where companies or government organizations have led to the degradation of their resources. Again, I gave example earlier of the Niger Delta in Nigeria. That's a community where for hundreds of years before 1950, the local people depend on agriculture, they depend on fishing. And once oil exploration started, the whole land is degraded. They can no longer fish, they can no longer get their agricultural product. So these communities should be, part of their right should be they should have access to be able to go to the courts. The good thing is that is happening, because I know Shell had been taken to a court in the UK and in the Netherlands, but a lot still needs to be done around that. There is a strong link really, so I should probably back to the question, is that there is definitely a strong link between, we can't divulge the two. If we want to solve environmental issues and we are not talking of human rights, we probably might end up creating more human rights abuses. And I'm talking from practical experience, which I've seen. Like I can give that example in the Niger Delta. Now we're talking about remediation of polluted lands. And one of the things you see is while we're trying to remediate polluted lands, we're actually removing people from their ancestral homes and moving them somewhere because of that. So that's also breaking their human rights, even though we want to achieve sustainability of the environment. So in thinking of environmental issues, we also need to think more broadly of the implication it has for human rights. But like I said, make sure the people have good access to information, their fundamental right is protected, they can participate in the decision-making process, and they do have access to justice.
Thank you. No, that was really well explained. I think examples really help put it into perspective and help people understand. So thank you. Dr. Wright, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think in a world where we live in nation states and who have a coercive power, and therefore the relationship between the individual and the state is based on human rights, then environmental issues need to be reinforced with the human rights, and the governments have to deliver on them. But we also live in a world where the compulsion is on the states to deliver human rights, but there isn't an international structure where people can expect the international community to deliver human rights. Yeah, this is a weakness of the whole United Nations system, etc. So I, in Britain, can expect my government to deliver human rights. I cannot do anything against, let's say, USA for polluting the climate. I'm not sure, and there isn't anything the small island countries can take the big polluters to. I think that is one of the weaknesses of international law, and I think there is an interesting parallel going on in the UN about transnational corporations and binding instruments, where they are proposing that if an individual, let us say in Tanzania or Botswana, feels that their human rights have been violated due to the activities of a corporation based in UK, they can bring a case in UK. And I think maybe something similar for climate needs to be done, which will probably, I think, check the excesses of some of the big polluters.
I think it definitely would. It definitely will check again, a good example is the one I said about the Niger Delta. So again, in the Niger Delta, Shell was the big one. There used to be BP, there is RG, and they've polluted for years. And they couldn't sue them in Nigeria because the Nigerian government wouldn't just allow that to happen. So they think they've gone, but it's changed now that in the UK, the Nigerian community took a case to the UK court and say, we want to sue in the UK. And the Supreme Court gave a judgment, I think last year, that yes, they can bring the case to the UK. I think that's what we need. I think that's the line that we are looking at within international community. We have it in other aspects where you see people being held for war crimes that are committed in another country, and they are taken to The Hague and they are being prosecuted. But we should be able to see that also for climate justice, where companies will go maybe to the Amazon in Brazil and clear part of the Amazon forest, and they just do it, take the log and take it back to wherever and nobody can punish them because the government of Brazil won't do it. So who will police the global commons? Who police the global commons? Where can we go to? And I agree with you, that is missing, the way we enforce that.
Thank you very much, both. No, that was really well answered. So if I might, for my rather final question on this diversity and inclusion matters within the environment. So for many decades, the Sikh Human Rights Group has been focused on encouraging the concept of pluralism, as Dr. Wright mentioned earlier, and kind of understanding that further. So that in short refers to the fact that whilst we all might want to save the planet, we will arrive at that point of positive action in very different ways, depending on our gender, our religion, our race, ability, economic status, and so forth. So with that being said, could you please explain to our listeners how important the perception of different people from diverse backgrounds has when it comes to understanding how to prevent the impacts of climate change?
Oh, very important. And I think I mentioned earlier, it's not only about different actors, but it's about the different demographic groups in society. I can give an example. I did a project recently in Kenya around aquaculture and fish farming. And traditionally, maybe if you know, in most African culture, it's like sort of very patriarchal, that you see more of the men dominating. But some of the best people that have the greatest knowledge about how aquaculture influence the environment and the implications and how best to manage it, and I'm talking from my own research, came from some of the female gender that were involved on the project. And that highlights for me the need not just only to bring in female and male onto that project just to say, okay, it's gender balance and they participated. But more importantly is that I could hear their opinion. So it's not just being present there around the table to just say, okay, it's gender balance. No, that's not just the only thing, but being able to hear their opinion. The next step is being able to make use and use that opinion or their voice really in the decision making process. And that's just one example that I've given. And I've seen that in all my projects, that where the project involves diverse group, there are times where you don't listen to some of the groups and the power imbalance might be so high that one group might want to dominate. If you listen to the variety or the diversity of voices present around the room or around the table, the information, the knowledge that we gather becomes very rich. It becomes so important that we can see the nuances and the diversity of opinions and solutions as well that can come out from those type of conversation or discussion. So for me, really, it's all about getting those different voices together and being able for them to be able to express their opinion around the table in finding solutions.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Wright, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think the conversation has been very good, very interesting, in that when we discuss our position with people, they seem to agree. They all agree that there needs to be plural approaches. They agree that something has been lost in cultures regarding climate. Rationality is not always the only way. In fact, it can be quite a tricky approach to dealing with the issues like this, because what may be rational to me may not be rational to you. I may, as a businessman, rationalize that, well, look, if I make a few millions now, then in 10 years' time, I'll be more climate friendly. I'll give it up, some of it, to some people. But other people might think, well, that's, what you're doing now is already harming us. So there are sometimes culturally ingrained, embedded practices of our most successful. And I think we like to see more of that at the international platforms, not just this language of fear. People don't really respond to fear so much around the world. I mean, if you look at all the climate meetings, they've all been, look, we're going to die, we're going to die. I think people get very fed up with that, and I think there need to be something more upbeat and more bring in different practices, and then I think that might change the way the whole debate moves forward. Yeah, there is no culture or religion or people I know, and you talked about the indigenous people. We did some projects. We're doing projects with the KwaZulu University in Durban, and they have seen that the traditional Ubuntu way of looking at the environment is very different than, say, the European way. And I see that in India in some places, and I think there has to be a bit more of that on the international platforms to get this the game rolling. Yeah,
I agree. No culture, no religion, almost all culture, most religion value the environment, so and acknowledges that. So even traditional religion that we have, what we call traditional religion in most Africa, you go there and you listen to it. It's all about the earth and how the earth is being occupied and being tended and being taken care of. I'm originally Yoruba from Nigeria, and if you see about the Yoruba cosmology, it's around caring for the earth. It's about the river and how important the river is to not only as a source of life, but also to fertility, to different things. So it's that association within culture and getting all these voices and these opinions and cultural nuances together. They're definitely going to play a role if we are looking to solve some of these climate challenges. And I agree also, it should not be talk about things that are like doomsday prophecy. There's a lot of positive in climate change story that we can share as well. There's a lot of good news out of the climate challenge. I've seen communities where farmers have been able to increase their livelihood and improve their yields and taking on indigenous practices to change processes. So again, I agree with you. There are a lot of good stories and good news. It's just that, like they say, bad news probably make it more to the headline than the good one. So there's a lot of good news within the climate change debate and everything we're talking about. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, both. I don't think many societies actually respond to fear. But no, that was really insightful. Thank you very much for your answers on that. I'll pass you over to Carlos now to conclude.
Thank you very much, Bethan. I'd just like to say thank you very much, Dr. Adekola and Dr. Jazdev Wright for being with us today. We've taken time out of what I'm sure is extremely busy schedules. I only have a few other concluding remarks, and this is this podcast has been brought to you by the Sikh Human Rights Group. For more information about Dr. Olalekan Adekola and the Sikh Human Rights Group's environmental and diversity policies, please visit our website, the details to which can be found within the description to this video. Or alternatively, please visit our social media accounts at SHRG_NGO. I have been Carlos Arbuthnot. Thank you very much for listening.